Yeah, hey, what's up, guys? This video's coming a little late. Hey, I'm gonna move. I'm in a bathroom right now. It's kind of echoing, but so this video's coming out a little later than I would have liked to. The college football playoff rankings came out last night. The new ones did. I was hoping to do a video on that because my last video for that did really well. I'm doing it now. It's a little bit later than I would have liked it to do it, but I was on the road last night for 12 hours coming home to New Jersey from Clemson, so I didn't really get a chance to do it. Obviously, couldn't do it while I was driving. Didn't have access to the internet. I did hear on the radio as the rankings were coming out. I was listening to the radio, so I heard the main change, I guess you could say, is that Miami and Clemson flip flopped. And there are so many chaotic scenarios where basically every team in the top nine, with the exception of Notre Dame, so 8 teams, are still have like potential to make it into the playoffs. And it's such a chaotic year. It's kind of like, but I enjoy this. I actually do enjoy this. Like, there's no. I believe that Alabama is the best team by far. We'll see about that come the Iron Bowl and then the SEC championship game. We'll see whether or not they really are the best team by far. Personally, I think they are, but we'll see. There doesn't really seem to be, like, in many people's minds, there doesn't really seem to be a front runner, like a really really great team that's just blowing everyone else away. I believe that will be Alabama. It just didn't have Alabama just doesn't hasn't had a ton of great competition this year, so they haven't really had a great strength of schedule. So you haven't really seen how dominant they are yet. I believe we're probably going to see that, though. I think that we're going to see it in like the next 2 weeks. But anyways, let's just run through the scenarios real quickly on who gets in and how this all works out. So it's important to note that Wisconsin will be playing. Should they not? Like, should everyone get to the, like? Let's just jump ahead a little bit. Let's jump ahead to the championship games. If once we get to the conference championship games, this is when it all starts getting interesting. So Wisconsin will play Ohio State most likely in the championship game. So Wisconsin's going to play Ohio State for their conference championship, and that's going to be huge, because if Wisconsin wins, then they're undefeated and they have their conference championship. And so people are saying it'd be almost impossible to keep them out at that point, because undefeated team, conference championship, conference champions, like, what, you can't really keep them out. You can't really justify keeping them out at that point. So they would essentially have to move up in. But if Ohio State wins, that basically knocks Wisconsin out entirely if Ohio State wins, and that throws Ohio State in the mix for potentially being, jumping into the playoffs in a maximum chaotic scenario. Like, Ohio State is in a situation where they don't control their own destiny. Winning out would help them, obviously, but they need other teams to lose, or they need, like, strange combinations to go up, like strange combinations of things to work out in a certain way uh, to essentially make that happen. Now, like, just ignore Penn State. Penn State really has lost out at this point. So they're not going to their conference championships. So they're kind of irrelevant. Notre Dame, unfortunately for them, they're not part of a conference, and they are a two-loss team. So two-loss team, no conference championship. They really don't have a shot because of that. So Notre Dame and Penn State are, just for the sake of the argument, they're out of it. The other big thing is Miami and Clemson have to play during the ACC championship. So we're getting a direct head-to-head of who's number 2 and 3 now. Clemson, here's the big deal. Clemson was number 2 prior to the new rankings. Miami was number 3 at that point. They flip-flopped. Now, where is that? No, like, that makes an impact because now Miami's ahead of Clemson. And the question is, if Miami loses it to Clemson now, they're still just a one-loss team. They'll be like, I think they'll be 11-1 by the time they reach the conference championship. They'll end up being 11-1. So where, does that drop them out of the playoffs, or does that leave them in? Like, they'll obviously have the loss to Clemson, and they won't be conference champions, but they'll still be an extremely good team. So where do you kind of get off of that? Like, where do you think they would fall? Because they really like, their record will be still worthy of the top 5, kind of. So do they fall out? Does a team like Wisconsin have to bump them technically, even though Wisconsin probably is not as skilled as Miami. Does Wisconsin bump them? Does Miami's like it's kind of it'll be an interesting thing. But now if Clemson loses, then Clemson's definitely get kicked out. Clemson it'd be easiest probably for the people who have to do the rankings if Clemson loses, because Clemson will just drop out of the top four. They won't really be in contention for a top four spot. So Clemson will just drop out entirely if Miami wins. But like I said, it's the other way around. When Clemson wins and Miami loses, that will give it be a more chaotic situation. It'll be hard to determine exactly who is going to be in, who's going to be out. Now, if we move on from that, the SEC is just SEC is going to be very interesting because they have Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama. So numbers 1, 6, and 7 are all SEC members. So it's kind of like, you've got 3 teams in the top 7, and it's only going to end up being 2 in the SEC championship game. And the interesting thing is, Auburn plays Bama this week in the Iron Bowl. That's the next game is the Iron Bowl between Bama and Auburn. This has always been a close game. If you remember, it's been a long time now, but that return by Chris Davis on Alabama tried a last-second field goal, and Chris Davis, a return man for Auburn, was back to field the missed field goal, and it came short, obviously. Davis got it, and he ran all the way down the field. He ran it was 109 yards or 108 yards and scored a touchdown. It was just incredible. Incredible end to a great game that year. But, I think it was tied too when they kicked it, but whatever. So, that's always been a close game. That's always a good rivalry game. And now you've got 2 teams. Both of them are in the top 10 now. Numbers 1 and 6. So it's going to be a really close game. Auburn's. I don't know about where Auburn's second loss came from. I know their first loss is from Clemson. So, another high-ranked team up there. But to be fair, Jarrett Stidham was not playing that well at that point in time. And now he's really picked up his game. He's playing extremely well. He played great against Georgia last week. Another big thing to look at is that Auburn beat Georgia last week, which is the only reason Auburn's even in the conversation for this as a 2-loss team is because they beat Georgia, who was then ranked number 1 in the country, at that point. So, Auburn has beaten technically the number 1 team in the country, and now they're facing another number 1 team, Bama. Now, if Auburn wins against Bama, it'll be Auburn versus Georgia in the SEC championship game. So it'll be it'll be 10-2 Auburn versus 11-1 or 10-1 Georgia. Now, in that case, what happens to Alabama? Because Alabama won't have the SEC championship game. They don't have an extraordinary strength of schedule, and they'll be 11-1. Now, in that instance, you almost have to drop Alabama out of the top 4 because you would think, if Oklahoma, I'm just assuming is going to win because Oklahoma doesn't really have a strong conference opponent with Baker Mayfield. I'm just assuming Oklahoma's going to win. Although Oklahoma's on shaky position because they're number 4 in the rankings, so they're the most likely team to get dropped out technically. But let's just ignore that for now. So if Auburn wins this week against Alabama, next week against Georgia, then Auburn definitely has to be in because they will have beaten numbers, they will have beaten 2 number 1s, and then Georgia when Georgia was down at 7 again. So they would have beaten so many good teams. Auburn would move up into the top 4 no matter what with that conference championship, and Auburn would be in. Georgia would have 2 losses, so Georgia would drop out. Bama would have 1 loss, so Bama would be hanging on the cusp. And Bama would basically be counting on Ohio State to beat Wisconsin. And then probably Miami beat Clemson, because in that case, Wisconsin won't be in, and Clemson will drop out. So it'll only be Oklahoma and Miami at that point. Auburn would move up and in. So, it'd be 3 teams. It'd be Auburn, Miami, and Oklahoma. Georgia wouldn't be relevant because Georgia would have 2 losses. And we already said Notre Dame wouldn't be relevant. Ohio State would be relevant at 11-2 or something like that with the conference championship. But they're a 2-loss team. So it'd come down to Ohio State, basically Ohio State or Alabama getting it. It'd be between those two at that point. Uh, so that'd be the best. That'd be like the best case scenario if Auburn loses to Auburn this weekend. If Auburn doesn't win, and Alabama wins this weekend, it's Bama versus Georgia. I'm pretty sure. I think it would be Bama versus Georgia. In which case, if Georgia wins, Georgia's in with one loss. And if Bama wins, Bama's obviously in and Georgia's knocked out at that point. But what happens to Bama if Georgia beats them in the SEC championship game? If that happens, if Georgia beats Bama, then it's basically like Alabama would be relying on Ohio State to beat Wisconsin and Miami to beat Clemson. So we could end up with a scenario where we would have a 2-loss Auburn team as the SEC championships, a 1-loss Bama team, a 2-loss Georgia team would be knocked out at that point. So just ignore that. So we could have a 1-loss Clemson team as an ACC championship, a 1-loss Miami team as the runner-up, Oklahoma as their conference championship, a 2-loss Auburn as the SEC champions, a 1-loss Bama as like a third or second runner-up kind of level guy at that point. So we would have Bama, Miami with 1 loss. Bama, Miami both with 1 loss and no championship. Clemson with 1 loss in championship. Oklahoma with 1 loss in championship. Let's just say Wisconsin loses. We can end up with a 2-loss championship team in Ohio State. And, and then like a 2-loss champion in Auburn. So like we have 2 teams with championships and 2 losses. Then we would have Oklahoma and Clemson as the arch champions. And then Miami and Auburn as 1-loss teams who are close to championship level caliber teams. So at that point, 1 loss versus 2 losses, it gets down to a scenario where like who's in, who's not in. It's ridiculously hard to tell because is Alabama technically like Alabama would have lost directly to Auburn, so that might knock Alabama out. But Alabama would they edge Miami? Would they edge Miami? Would they edge Ohio State technically? Would Miami edge Ohio State? They probably wouldn't edge out Auburn, but like you would get down to a scenario where we'd have essentially, 6 teams that were caliber, like 6 teams in conversation for the playoff scenario, and it'd be really interesting to see how that will work out. But it'd be crazy to think about if you would have there's the potential that there could be 2 SEC and 2 ACC teams in the Final Four. I don't think that will ever happen. Well, not this year at least. I don't think that will happen. I think Oklahoma will stick around no matter what and kind of ruin that. But you could potentially see like Auburn and Alabama and Miami and Clemson. That's a scenario that could happen. I don't think it will, but it could. In which case you would see like there's going to be conferences essentially that are left out potentially, without even a team in the playoff, which is highly likely this time around because there's just so much potential there's so many teams are so close together. Like that's what the chair of the committee said last night was that so many teams 1 through 5 are so close together. I would argue teams 1 through 9, with the exception of Notre Dame, are so close. Maybe just stick to teams 1 through 7. I guess in that case, are so close together that it's hard to determine like who would fall where. You really can't tell until the conference championship games and after the next week, after rivalry weekend. But certainly gonna be interesting. I can't wait to see how it all works out. It's gonna be great. That's it for this video, guys. So I'll talk to you later.